All right, let's dive into a story that, officially, never even happened. This whole thing is pieced together from declassified files, from first-hand witness accounts, of a discovery made in a secret Soviet facility way back in 1967. A discovery so massive, so world-changing, that it was quite literally erased from history.
It all kicks off with this absolutely chilling quote from the lead geneticist on the project. He didn't just run the DNA tests once, he ran them 7 separate times. And every single time the results came back the same, scientifically impossible. This wasn't some lab error. This was a reality that just shattered everything he thought he knew about science.
So, where did all this go down? A place called Institute 47. On paper, it was a facility studying genetic anomalies. But in the winter of 1967, its researchers came face to face with something far beyond any anomaly they could have possibly imagined.
Inside that facility were 3 subjects, found frozen solid in a remote cave. And as you can see, their scale was just immense. The tallest of them measured a staggering 3.3 meters. That's nearly 11 feet tall. Just try to picture that for a second.
But it wasn't just their height. Their bone density was found to be 3 times that of a normal human being. A physiology like that, it suggests a frame built for incredible strength. And maybe, just maybe, a lifespan that could stretch on for centuries.
And then came the carbon dating results. They tested the ice itself, and it placed their preservation at roughly 4,200 years ago. So they had been frozen, perfectly preserved, since about the same time as the Great Flood you read about in ancient texts.
And then, the truly impossible happened. One of the subjects actually woke up. It spoke a single word. A word the linguists on site transcribed as sounding something like Nephil. And that's when it clicked for the stunned researchers. They made the connection to Genesis 6:4. These weren't just some giant humans. They were looking at the Nephilim.
So you're probably asking, how on earth do we know any of this? Well, it's because some of the people who were actually there decided to break their silence. Their testimonies, suppressed for over 50 years, they form the very core of this entire story.
Meet Svetlana Petrova. She was the night nurse on the secret basement ward. She was assigned to what she thought were 3 massive cadavers. Then, in the middle of the night, one of them just sat up. Can you imagine this sheer terror? Svetlana's account is what gives us these incredible, vivid details. The tallest one snapped at surgical steel restraints like they were made of thread. She said their language was melodic, almost like water over stones, but completely alien. Their eyes, gray like granite, and their breathing was so deep and powerful you could hear it from the other side of the room.
Okay, so then they bring in the big guns. Dr. Yuri Reznik, a top linguist flown in from Moscow. He was told he was just consulting on some archaeological find. What they didn't tell him was that the finds were alive and speaking a language that shouldn't even exist.
What Yuri realized was, frankly, staggering. They were speaking the single unified language of humanity described in Genesis 11. This was the mother tongue from before the Tower of Babel. It had the roots of languages that wouldn't even exist for thousands of years. They spoke of pre-flood cities, and one even claimed to be descended from Azazel, a leader of the fallen angels.
And then you have Dr. Helena Volkov, a biblical scholar. Her job was to cross-reference everything they were saying with ancient texts, and it was to her that one of these beings made a truly world-shattering revelation.
This is where everything just clicks into place. Their stories lined up perfectly with these suppressed texts like the Book of Enoch. One of the beings even gave his name as Barak, a figure known from these ancient apocryphal writings. And then he gave Helena something unbelievable. A list of coordinates for 23 other locations around the globe where more of his kind were still lying frozen.
Now you'd think this discovery, actual proof of a literal Genesis, would be celebrated, right? Not so much. For the officially atheist Soviet state, this was a threat, a huge one. And so, the order came down from Moscow, erase everything.
And the cover-up was swift and it was brutal. Within just 2 weeks of that termination order, a KGB team arrived. The 3 beings were executed with potassium chloride injections, and the systematic destruction of every piece of evidence began. And get this, over the next 5 years, 13 key members of the research team died in mysterious accidents.
The extent of this purge was absolute. The bodies were cremated, the documents burned.
The cave entrance was dynamited shut. And for the very few who survived, like Helena, their careers were completely destroyed. The goal wasn't just to hide the truth, it was to make it as if it never, ever happened.
But here's where the story gets even bigger. It turns out this wasn't just a Soviet secret. It was part of a global, centuries-old agreement to keep this exact truth hidden from the entire world. This bombshell comes from the deathbed confession of Colonel Mile Petrov, the very KGB officer who led the cleanup operation. He revealed that his team coordinated with the most unlikely of partners you could possibly imagine, the Vatican. So why? It all came down to a shared fear. The Soviets were terrified the discovery would validate religion and destroy their atheist state. And the Vatican? They were terrified it would validate suppressed texts like the Book of Enoch and completely upend centuries of established doctrine. They were ideological enemies who united to bury the same incredibly inconvenient truths. But here's the thing about trying to erase history. You can't burn everything. Some pieces of the puzzle always survive, preserved by the very people who were ordered to forget.
These are the artifacts that form the basis of this whole story. The massive steel beds still bolted to the basement floor, Yuri's hidden notebook, a file of 12 photos saved by a military liaison, Helena's notes with those 23 locations, and of course the living memories of the witnesses and the stunning confession of the man who was sent to silence them all.
Which brings us right back to this number, 23. The number of potential sites where, according to a being who lived before the flood, more of the Nephilim are still out there, preserved in ice, just waiting.
And that really leaves us with this one haunting question. I mean, all this happened back in 1967, but if the witnesses are telling the truth, this story is far from over. It really makes you wonder, what else is still out there, frozen in time, just waiting to be rediscovered?